Looking to modernize your dairy operations? Rockwell Automation helps dairy processors optimize and scale production to stay competitive in a rapidly evolving market. From rising material costs to workforce shortages and sustainability demands, today's challenges are complex. Rockwell Automation helps processors simplify operations with integrated automation and real-time production insights, so you can reduce product variability, increase yield, and make faster decisions. Visit rock.auto/dairy to begin your journey to smarter dairy production. That's ROK.AUTO/dairy.
This is the Dairy Download, brought to you by EverAg Insights and the International Dairy Foods Association, where we offer extra sharp market and policy insights on dairy. I'm your host, Phil Plord, an advisor to EverAg Insights and the executive director of the Wisconsin Dairy Products Association.
And I'm your co-host, Kathleen Wolfley, the leader at EverAg Insights.
This week's episode is all about dairy packaging and EPR requirements. Our guests are here to give us their thoughts on packaging trends, regulations, and innovation. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, Kathleen, where are we now?
CME spot prices as of Friday, August 21st. CME block cheddar closed at $1.53, down 7 cents. Spot butter closed at $1.46, mostly unchanged on the week, and the spot non-fat dairy milk market was trading at $1.71, 3 cents lower on the week. Phil, I think that the most important thing right now is the non-fat market. So we're sitting at $1.71 on the CME as of Friday, but that was actually off of the highs of, I believe, is $1.85 earlier in the week last week. We've seen a significant rally in this non-fat market here over the course of the last couple of weeks. And in my estimation, there's probably a couple different things in the mix here. First, would it surprise you if the cupboards were a little on the bear side coming into the second half of the year? We had this big run to 230 early in the year, and prices came down closer to parity with the rest of the world, the lowest prices that folks had had an opportunity to buy in several months. And I think that buyers came to the market saying, yeah, I think I'll take those cheaper prices. I don't have a ton of product in inventory. And now there's a push from the buy side to restock. I think there's also some concern on the milk production side. We had California hit a heat spell a couple weeks ago that knocked back some production and some product availability. There's been some uncertainty around milk supply in the EU market, depending on where you look. And there's a potential strong El Nino that could start to hit New Zealand in the coming months as well, which I think ultimately maybe add a little bit more spookiness to buyers that were looking to refill those pantries.
Yeah, I mean, kind of has some hallmarks of a classic short covering bounce, right? The market started going down, everybody ran away. It looked like the market made a bottom. Everybody comes rushing back in. But yeah, I mean, to me, if you want to be friendly, the dairy complex generally and non-fat specifically, I just think this European milk production / weather situation is going to have some long tentacles. And my hunch is we're going to be hearing about bad feed, open cows, other lingering effects of some very, very hot, extremely hot, dry conditions. And I think the impact of that's going to linger for months. And so, the numbers still aren't bad out of Europe, but I don't know. It's just a little, to your point, it's a little spooky. And if you want to be bullish, that's where I would be focused personally.
All right. What's your most important thing?
I'm going to go with the price of corn. As of this recording on Monday morning, December corn is trading at $5.13 a bushel. Had a high today of about $5.24. And interesting, we have had pretty good growing conditions, although it got a little dry in July, back to wet in August, but maybe too late. Crop tours pegging prospective yields a little bit below last year's crop tour levels, a little tighter balance sheet. You've got some issues in Europe with weather. You've got the Ukraine situation, very dicey. And so all of a sudden, corn out of nowhere has rallied more than 50 cents in about 3 or 4 weeks. We were $4.60 on December corn not so long ago, and we're over $5.10 this morning. Why is that important? Well, from a dairy producer perspective, you're looking at added cost, and at a time, so you're adding to cost at a time when you're starting to take a little bit of income away on the beef on dairy side of things. I don't think we're in a perilous position, but you have shaved a combination of lower milk prices and some of these higher feed costs have shaved about $2 off of the prospective profitability for the next 12 months on the milk income over feed side of things. You may have taken, I don't know, 75 cents to $1.50 off the beef income based on what's happened there. And while I'm not convinced that means we're tight and going to be in liquidation mode, it certainly raises the specter of that.
Okay, Phil, that kind of ties into my stat of the week. 199,000. U.S. cow numbers were up 199,000 head year over year, according to USDA in its July milk production report. Cow numbers were flat from June to July, but the report did feature a 33,000 head uptick in the June cow number figures. That is a massive adjustment in cow numbers. It took the June milk production numbers up on a year-over-year basis for total production. The July numbers landed at plus 2.2%. We've just got a lot of cows. It's not a news story, but we continue to see data from USDA that once again reminds us that there's a lot of cow power out there in the marketplace.
Yeah, and if you say, hey, look, when's milk production going to turn for the lower? Well, it's going to be hard to turn it for the lower as cow numbers keep turning for the high or stay high, right? I mean, that's a lot of extra cows. And just, even at flat or even a small decrease in productivity, you're still going to have more milk because of all the cow power, as you mentioned. So to me, it's a big deal.
And to your point, those cows are going to get more expensive to feed here in pretty short order. What's your stat of the week?
My stat of the week is 29,561. That's the average attendance at Major League Baseball games in 2026 through July, up 0.6% year over year. And you might be saying, what the heck does this have to do with anything? I don't know, except for as part of our work on the demand side of the equation, all the consumer demand stuff we see, the big headline numbers, all point in the same direction, kind of meh. Not great, not terrible, a little bad, not so bad, a little good, not so great. And so in the absence of any real splashy indicators this week for some of the work I do, I went down the road of obscure indicators. So Major League Baseball attendance, gambling take in Las Vegas. You know what that result is? Same thing. It's up a little bit. RV sales. Now those are down, but that's a bigger price item. And so just sifting through the consumer landscape to find evidence of real change in behavior for better or for worse. And I keep coming up with nothing. So Major League Baseball, the average cost of a game is up. It's not cheap to go to a baseball game. Heaven help you if you want to go to a Dodgers game. It's over $400 for parking, a couple hot dogs, sodas, etc. But we're still going, but not by a lot in terms of the margin. So that's my stat of the week. Just another meh consumer indicator. Demand has been so-so. And from a macroeconomic perspective, even the obscure indicators say the same.
Okay, well, I guess I'll turn this to you, Phil. Isn't meh still not great? Like, you would expect to see a couple % growth in baseball attendance. Gambling has been really a big push here with people spending a lot more money in the last couple years.
It's really online gambling, yes. They're not going to Vegas necessarily.
No, they're not going to Vegas. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not great.
We've flatlined.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some people that, there's a skies about ready to fall crowd who's running around, thinks that, we're one something or other away from disaster because of this, that, or the other thing. And there's, I think there's some saying, as long as the stock market's up, we're all okay. Crowd as well. And it's just somewhere in the middle, which is, I don't think it's a headwind or a strong headwind for demand for dairy products, but it sure isn't a tailwind.
In other words, it's just kind of meh.
As the kids say.
My stat of the week was about cow numbers. And my fearless prediction kind of is along those lines. I think that we will see the average beef on dairy cross-calf price, as reported by USDA, fall to $1,000 per head in the remainder of 2026. We're sitting around $1,200 now. That's significantly lower than what we were trading just a few months back. I think that we'll see somewhere close to 1,000.
And for scorekeeping purposes, just to be honest and accountable here, we're looking at that Pennsylvania, New York auction average that we track, right?
That is correct.
Recently around $1,200.
Yep.
Peaked around $1,600.
Yep. How about for you, Phil?
This could be whimsical and stupid, but I see today's December corn high of 5.24 a bushel, and I see a lot of good corn out there. I'm going to drive across Iowa tomorrow. I'm sure I'm going to see a lot of good looking corn. So I'm going to say that my fearless prediction is that at expiration, somewhere in December, when that December 2026 futures contract expires, it will go off the board at less than 5.24 a bushel. I'm not saying that today's high is going to be the high, but I'm going to say we will expire lower.
For those of you listeners that don't have supersonic hearing, Phil did like a mini mic drop. He dropped his pen on the desk. It was like it's going to expire below, was it 5.24?
5.24.
Pen drop.
Drop the Sharpie.
Mic drop.
Drop the Sharpie, people.
Sharpie, excuse me. All right, Phil. Let's get to our first guest.
We're excited to have Lowell Huffman join us on the Dairy Download. Lowell is Director of Channel Partnerships at RePurpose Global. From navigating EPR compliance to scaling plastic recovery, Lowell works with trade associations, coalitions, and solution providers to make brand compliance easier. Lowell, welcome to the Dairy Download.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, let's get right after it. Tell us a little bit about your company, RePurpose. What does it do, and what's your role?
We try to help companies make packaging sustainability and extended producer responsibility compliance practical. In some capacities, we've been described as the TurboTax of EPR compliance. And I like to say that in some ways, we kind of created the first iteration of a global voluntary EPR by working with brands that wanted to make sustainability top of mind and take action on their plastic usage for the last, 8-9 years or so, and then have built a tremendous amount of foundational packaging data that we wanted to put to work. And as EPR kind of took off here in the United States, we pivoted from environmental and plastic sustainability and voluntary recovery to this compliance thing.
Let's take a small step backwards. And for the lay people, what does EPR actually stand for?
So EPR stands for Extended Producer Responsibility. And what's interesting is that EPR really isn't new. EPR has been around since like the late 80s, which were a pretty, is a rad decade for a lot of reasons. But the first EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, which essentially means that it comes down to accountability, right? A company that introduces a certain thing into a certain geographic area, EPR is a statutory regulation that makes it their responsibility to kind of steward the end of life of that. So it started with things like e-waste and electronics and batteries, things like coatings, paint and so forth. So these things have been around for a long time. And the idea is that they shift the responsibility from like the taxpayer or the local municipality to that producer, that person, that company that creates and introduces it. So we've had a series of states in the United States here that have passed these laws for packaging EPR, the packaging around products, and essentially is designed to raise a tremendous amount of funds to make investments in infrastructure and so forth, whether it be collection, hauling, sortation, so that we can have proper end of life of these things, because we are landfilling a lot of stuff. And let me just tell you, there's two things we can't make more of. That's time and that's land. And at some point we will run out of land to fill up with all of our junk.
And so talk about the sort of universe of plastic in this conversation. I mean, I know I cut up the little 6-pack holders. There's, plastic is everywhere, obviously, or it's ubiquitous. Talk about in the food industry, maybe the dairy industry, talk about some of the things that you're working with people on repurposing, recovering, and managing better.
Yeah, dairy is an interesting one. And to my point earlier, right, I speak with a lot of industries, whether it's, electronics. I mean, you think about how different packaging formats are for, like, let's say furniture, right? Shipping a 100-pound beautiful walnut nightstand requires a tremendous amount of heavy packaging. It's different than shipping like a cup of yogurt. So we've been working with a number of kind of like, the welterweight dairy companies to help them solve, like, look, we have all of these states that are turning on these EPR laws that, essentially it's kind of like insurance. It's like if you're a good driver, you get really good rates. And EPR is not just about taxing, things like expanded polystyrene or flexible multi-laminate materials, but it's ultimately about saying, hey, here are the things that are hardest to collect and sort and have, actual a recyclable product with an end market, to changing and transforming that behavior over time through what's called eco-modulation. It's a framework of incenting the right behavior and disincenting through bonuses and malices the right types of behavior. And dairy, I think is in a really tough spot, candidly, because what are the alternatives from a food safety and all the things that dairy needs that are going to qualify for these incentives that these states want? And there's a potential that dairy could, unfortunately, if the innovation in packaging materials, formats, etc., don't find economic parity with virgin plastics in the near term, of footing a lot of the EPR kind of bill, so to speak, over time. So we're really keen on understanding the data behind all of the things happening in the background with dairy.
Who within a company, dairy company or otherwise, should be on that EPR team to make sure that they're optimizing compliance? Because it sounds like this is a state-by-state thing. This isn't a nationwide. There's innovation. There's cost savings. Who's the team?
It's interesting because when you think about EPR, right, what happens inside of a company's boardroom or meeting room is somebody will say, hey, what's this EPR thing happening over in California? It's Senate Bill 54. And someone raises their hand and says, oh, I'll take a look. And then at that point, they become the internal EPR owner, responsible for navigating for their company this entire process of like covered material categories in each state, the fee schedules, the source reduction plans, all this stuff. I call them the accidental owner. What happens is those people, whether they're in, marketing or sales or compliance, like this becomes like a full-time job. And we've done some really interesting case studies that just show how much work is involved. But the answer is it's it's very much cross-functional. There has to be one accountable lead internally, but it is not a one-person job. Typically what we see is if you have a sustainability or ESG function in your company, they're involved. Packaging engineering is involved, regulatory or legal, certainly. Procurement has to be involved because they're the ones that buy all the stuff that goes around the product. They're the receipt keepers, so to speak. You have supply chain, you have finance, you have operations, you got data and IT, because without the proper data, that is all of the components and material data sheets about all the stuff that goes along with your product, and all your sales data, all that has to be there for you to be able to effectively and accurately report. With a couple of errors based on data that they were pulling, if that's not reported correctly, you could have hundreds of thousands of dollars of erroneous fees being paid over or under. And again, I think that's really where I go back to, like, one of the biggest challenges, especially in dairy, is getting that complete, reliable data set across this large product portfolio that enable you to report accurately and on time, because this is a very, very heavy lift.
Okay, so what are some of those best practices on accuracy, improving data, and ultimately doing that EPR planning?
I always tell folks start early. People are like, oh, I'll get to that. And then, like this May 31st of this year, we had 6 reporting deadlines across a number of states. And it's like so many brands, thousands of brands were kind of caught with like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And this is like months of work. Again, think about all the data that has to come together that never has really been packaged up before together. So I always tell brands, you have to start early. I think that it's really important to build a single source of truth with your data. If a good foundation of data is what is going to be this living, breathing data set that's going to have to be reported upon for years to come. You think about California, for instance, we have obligations through 2032. So it's like, I hate when people say, I'm just going to report in May and then I'm done. It's like, I'm good. It's like, no, that data set you're going to have to update and refine. And the fact is, a lot of the data that's required is outside of your organization. There's a lot of cross-functional, cross-departmental data that can be gathered relatively quickly. But when you think about working with, suppliers over in Asia or, at any place, if it's outside of the US, like there's all kinds of stuff that has to come together. So I always say, start early, build a single source of truth that you can, query and that you can work on and update and make more accurate over time. Define things down to the smallest granular level. And make sure you have a good validation process that you can follow, because a lot of this is just about proving and being confident in the types of data that back up your report to the Circular Action Alliance, who is the designated pro right now for all of these states.
There's California. It's probably easy to pick out California over here, and we've got somebody else over there. So as part of the challenge of this coordinating different, is there any harmonization of these rules and regulations, or is it pretty much a big beautiful mosaic?
It's part mosaic, part harmonized. And again, I think one of the advantages that the U.S. has right now is that we are a singular pro system as of this time, right? So the Circular Action Alliance has been the assigned producer responsibility or pro organization to implement these state plans. So that does give the greatest chance for harmonization. But to your point, there are 95 covered material categories in California versus 60 to 63 in both Colorado and Oregon. We're awaiting information on the CMCs, or the covered material categories, in the state of Maine. Same with Minnesota, the state of Washington. It is. It's very much, there are some, it's like EPR as a thing underlying is kind of here's the goal and the outcome, but each state, and I'll say this, right? I live in Indiana, and the challenges that we have with our waste management system are vastly different than they are in California. California has mountains. It's very large. It's very rural, very agrarian. So, the challenges that they have to actually have collection points and trucks hauling this information or material are very different. So just that fact alone, the programs, right? If you try to federalize or standardize this too much, then you begin to kind of reduce the effectiveness of how that state is going to do the things that they want to do. So California says, I want 65% recyclability of plastics and most materials by 2032, which is okay, so they have some geographic and economic challenges that are unique to California to achieve that. They also want to see a 25% net reduction in plastic weight and the total number of plastic components that are going into the state. Whereas, Colorado says, hey, we're going to try to make this a little simpler. We're not even going to consider tertiary packaging, for instance, whereas Oregon and California say pallet wrap, stretch wrap, all that sort of stuff is very much in scope. So I guess there's harmonization to the extent that there can be, but yeah, these are very much catered state-specific programs that are going to have a tremendous amount of nuance that just create layers and levels of complexity that, again, industries like dairy have a lot to contend with for sure.
Let's talk about the future. 5 years from now, how should dairy companies be thinking about packaging and EPR for the future?
This is a marathon, not a sprint. I think there's one thing. I think a lot of companies are just assuming that packaging EPR is going to go away. Again, it's not. So understand that this is going to be around. Again, EPR has existed for decades, and it's a proven mechanism to drive the outcomes for states. That ultimately this comes down to financing, right? The taxpayers cannot fund everything. So basically they're saying, look, packaging is one of the things that is most ubiquitous in our society and is, largely filling up landfills, and doesn't necessarily need so think this is a long game. I think that, again, strong foundation in data is going to be your friend, because we are seeing way too many companies over or under reporting, finding themselves either in the CAA and the states can levy penalties up to $25,000 up to $50,000 a day, plus interest, plus penalties beyond that. for non-liable producers. They're, the enforcement arms are, EPR and packaging is very new. There has been a lot of leniency within the CAA as far as accepting late reports and inaccurate reports and so forth. As these enforcement muscles are created and honed and exercised over time, they're going to get a lot more stringent. So I think brands need to be prepared for that. But I would also tell companies lean into technology. It is amazing what is happening. Moore's law is very much in effect. And then, begin to push on your vendors to create and bring to market with economic parity the types of things that dairy companies need, right? If they want to get away from plastic, we need alternatives that are economically viable. That all happens with innovation and bringing things to scale the same way we have with things like, paper, fiber, plastic, etc.
Well, Lowell, I know I learned a lot about RePurpose, what you're doing, how you're helping the dairy industry navigate EPR. Thank you so much for joining us on the Dairy Download.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Let's hear more about packaging from our second guest.
We're excited to have Travis Klug join us on the Dairy Download. Travis is the marketing manager at Amcor, helping shape the company's cheese packaging portfolio so dairy processors have the solutions they need, including those for emerging EPR requirements. Travis, welcome to the Dairy Download.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
So just to kick things off today, tell us a little bit about Amcor and your role within the company.
So Amcor is a global leader in packaging solutions. Our acquisition of Berry Global back in 2025 really did broaden our capabilities across both flexibles and rigids packaging in a very complementary way that, we think has really strengthened what we can deliver to customers. And for sustainability, it's allowed us to accelerate innovation across circular packaging and really, push the boundaries on what's possible. Dairy is absolutely a big part of our story. Our dairy roots go back to the 1960s, back in New London, Wisconsin, when Kerwood, one of the companies in our history, ultimately helped change the way that cheese was packaged and preserved. That plant, in New London is still running today, and that legacy, really still drives us. As for me, I'm the marketing manager on our dairy team. I focus on our flexible packaging for cheese, and I have the opportunity to partner really closely with our R&D team, our Catalyst Innovation Group, and the broad group of sustainability experts that we have. To, as you mentioned before, really try and develop solutions that can help our dairy customers navigate all of the evolution of what we're experiencing in the world today. Consumer changes, sustainability, and with that EPR, and then, obviously retail expectations too.
So let's talk about dairy packaging, specifically cheese. What solutions do you have generally, and what are you developing to be EPR compliant? Talk about that cheese packaging space.
Yeah, absolutely. So EPR has definitely reshaped how packaging's designed, how it's funded, how it's managed at its end of life. And, we're ultimately realizing that there is a greater accountability for the recyclability of materials. And so at Amcor, we're investing quite a bit in recycle-ready, flexible packaging solutions that are going to meet those industry standards that are needed, and ultimately deliver on, the expectations that our customers have, their customers have, and, consumers as well. We have a few different opportunities to get into the market here in cheese. One that I guess I would highlight first is Amprima Plus. That's our recycle-ready flexible packaging. Again, that's designed to meet the APR requirements, the Golden Design Rules. It's passed the APR's critical guidance testing and, ultimately pre-qualified for store drop-off with how to recycle. And, all of those things kind of add up to say, they're fully aligned with EPR requirements. And then on the rigid side, I want to make sure I'm celebrating that, that new Amcor, the one Amcor we have today of rigids and flexibles. We have expertise on the polypropylene side, high density polyethylene, really ensuring that, almost everything we make on the rigid side is recycle ready. ultimately trying to eliminate, any of the stresses that our customers would have about whether something is EPR compliant.
So let's talk about that for a second for a layperson. Now, this week I spent time helping at a judging contest. So I cut open a lot of boxes, 40-pound boxes of 40-pounders. And so when you talk about rigid packaging, is that the cardboard box on the outside, and flexible is the plastic where the cheese is sitting inside? Or talk about what that is.
Yeah, great question. So the flexible side of the business, as I would think of it, imagine what you might see at a grocery store where you're shopping in the aisles, and there could be what we call flow wrap packages, but that would have sliced cheese and chunk cheese.
Got it. Yep.
Or blocks of cheese, shredded cheese pouches, things like that.
Very much consumer side then.
Yeah, absolutely. We do also have flexible packaging on the food service side as well. Bulk shredded cheese packages that, that shredded cheese goes on pizzas at a pizzeria, or,
so like those 5-pound bags or whatever.
Bingo.
Yep.
And so that very much is the flexible side. There's other aspects there too, but when we think of rigid packaging, and the reason that our acquisition of Berry Global was such a complementary thing, the best example I could give is thinking about like a tub of sour cream or cottage cheese. And so what Berry Global's aspect brought to our Amcor portfolio was that rigid tub and the rigid top. And then what Amcor already had in our flexible world was that easy peel lidding film that goes under the cap. And so ultimately, with that combination of capabilities and technologies from the Amcor legacy side and the Berry legacy side, we have packaging solutions that are from top to bottom to top.
So at this contest, we were also doing sour creams, and we ripped a lot of we saw a lot of that packaging, and we had some 5-pound shreds as well. Yeah. So I totally get it. So EPR laws and regulations are changing the economics of packaging. So how do you see those regulations influencing the way dairy companies evaluate their choices, and not just from a sustainability perspective, but from a more holistic business and cost perspective as well?
No, it's a super important part of the consideration, right? We're all in business to make money, and you have to think about the economics of things. And ultimately, EPR is going to fundamentally reshape how a dairy company would be thinking about their packaging, because you have these fees, EPR fees, that will be a major part of the total cost of ownership. And so, you have to think about the design choices, the cost structures, what that long-term strategy is, all of those things. And, ultimately, these EPR fees and incentives are touching every material, every format. And, ultimately, companies have to think through packaging in a totally different financial lens.
You're all in now on flexible and rigid plastics.
Absolutely. Yep.
What innovations look most promising in those arenas?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that I think is super exciting, because there's elements absolutely that are sustainability based, and others obviously that we're always working on innovation just in general, continuous improvement mindset. But yeah, as I think of the sustainability in particular, the innovations that are going to stand out the most are the ones that are merging sustainability with performance. Consumers are absolutely going to be looking for more sustainable films, but they don't want to give up the things that they've become accustomed to previously. Think about things like convenience, opening, reclosing.
Like cracker cuts, right? Like, in a clamshell pack and that sort of stuff, right?
Exactly. So they're looking for convenience, freshness, safety, all of those things, and those have to stay there. In the past, there were so many decades of material science and packaging science that went into developing all of these multi-material structures to achieve those needs for barrier, to keep it fresh, for abuse resistance, so that the package still maintained its integrity. But those are harder to recycle, and those may come with higher EPR fees. And so we're working both internally and externally with partners in the industry to make sure that our solutions are not only meeting the EPR and recyclability requirements, but still maintaining those elements that a consumer is looking for on their packaging. So yeah, we've got I mentioned it before, and Prima Plus, that is, our branded name for our recycle ready films in the flexible space. We also have something we call Revolution Barrier APET, that actually is utilized with those cracker cut trays you talked about earlier. And then we have EcoTight shrink bags, which, this is a different element of sustainability actually that I think is kind of cool to call out. It is recycle ready, which is a big deal for EPR. But our EcoTight shrink bags also get rid of PVDC, which is on a global list of problematic materials. So you're not only balancing recyclability when it comes to sustainability, but there are elements of, the packaging materials that are just not acceptable in the future. And so, we've got solutions there. And then, on the rigid side, our team is doing some cool things there too. Lightweighting is another element of sustainability, right? It's all about, putting less plastic out into the market. And so, they're doing lightweighting within rigid containers and bottles, higher levels of PCR content, designing PET bottles and containers to be 100% recyclable, again, we're doing all of those things to help make sure that we can meet our customers' specific needs, both on the flexible and the rigid side of cheese packaging and all of dairy packaging.
So thinking 5 to 10 years down the road, can you imagine or share with us some imagination of yours around what do cheese and other dairy product packaging will look like that might be different from today?
Yeah, it's crazy to imagine 5 to 10 years from now, because no one even knows what tomorrow looks like, the next day, et cetera. But it is critically important, and it's kind of fun. EPR legislation today is so much in its infancy. And so, right now, as you're probably well aware, these packages are designed based on current infrastructure. And so, the collection, sortation, reprocessing, all of those aren't fully developed yet. And so the cool thing about EPR, it's not just a fee, to take money from producers, but it's to reinvest and to help build that infrastructure so that longer term, these packages can be curbside recycled, so that you as a consumer aren't taking flexible packaging back to a store through the store drop-off program, but you're actually, having that convenience to bring it just to your curbside. I also think, packaging, that evolution, there's elements that, we at Amcor have been doing, some partnering with our, the OEMs, the equipment manufacturers, to make sure that the innovative packaging solutions, whether, that's around sustainability or other innovations, work seamlessly with their equipment. Faster startup, smoother integration, optimized performance, all of those things, that are super important to make sure that, the packaging of the future is where it needs to be.
All right, Travis, a real tough question to close on today. Do you have a favorite cheese?
Oh man, that is hard. But I can tell you, being a true Wisconsinite, from birth till now, we have a whole drawer in our refrigerator that is, blocked just for cheese. So, I would say it depends so much on what I'm looking for, but a good fresh squeaky cheese curd is where it's at for me and my family. And can't beat fresh mozzarella to put on a pizza. My family likes to make those from scratch every now and then, and having that just really kind of ups the game and makes it feel like we're out at a restaurant.
Those of us lucky enough to live in Wisconsin do live close to the squeaky curds. Travis, thank you so much for joining us on the Dairy Download.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great. Appreciate you.
That's a wrap for today's show. Thank you once again to our sponsor for this episode, Rockwell Automation. As always, want to thank our production team, Maggie McLean, Mariah Minnick, Andrew Jerome, and Jeff Cullen at IDFA, and Abby Bauer over here at EverAg Insights. If you're interested in what Kathleen does for her day job, check her out at insights.ever.ag. Remember, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button and leave us a favorable review on your favorite podcast platform.
Thanks for listening to the Dairy Download. Until next time, stay sharp.